to talk about the TTK problem within Warzone. And initially, I know that some people think that this is going to be a video complaining about the TTK, but it's actually going to be the opposite and talk about how the TTK is not actually all that fast. I know some people are going to be like, what do you mean? I'm getting deleted. I don't get a chance to react. Yada, yada, yada. Yes, we're going to go ahead and talk through some of these things and then also compare this to Warzone 1, which had significantly faster TTKs, but for both long range, medium range, and even up to close range, on top of all the various broken TTKs we've had with various different weapons, whether it was the DMR for long range, the Gallantry blueprint on the MAC-10, some of the shotguns that we had that actually one-shotted, snake shots, and all kinds of other stuff, an FFAR that actually deleted within like under 500 milliseconds, which is insanely fast with insanely movement speed. There's a lot of other things, so that's what we're going to go ahead and break down, and why I think actually lowering the TTK in some ways could actually improve the overall net experience of the game as we get into it. So to give a quick example, we're going to go to TrueGameData.com and kind of give you some examples using the comparison tool with the TTK chart. So right now we could bump it to 150 HP or 300 HP. And over here, it gives a better demonstration depending on the specific damage drop off. We'll keep this super simple just because it's just like a talking point, because some people are actually claiming that it's multiplayer level TTKs. So right here, if you land a stomach shot, and even if you're just perfect and you just shoot chest and above, you're going to get 854 TTK or a 949 TTK or 300 HP. Meanwhile, in multiplayer, it's going to literally be half of that because they have half the HP. So it's not even comparable. Yes, you do get deleted. Time to react, server desync, and other variables do contribute to making it feel faster. But in general, it's nowhere near multiplayer HP. And then we switch to the SOG, which is a close range weapon and definitely in the conversation as the #1 or top 3 SMG or close range metas. What we can do is go here again. And if we go to 300 HP, we get 2 stomach or leg shots. We're going to get a 594 TTK. Which is on the slower end of the TTK, but we can actually get that all the way down to 528 if we get maybe 1 headshot in the mix, mostly chest and neck, and we just do not hit any stomach or limb. But realistically, probably 594. Either way, 528, and then we go that multiplayer. Again, we see a similar trend where it is essentially half. This is a TTK of 264, which times 2, a little bit over 500. So as you can see there, that is not true. And I was going through some of my old tweets because I wanted to see what the TTKs were back in the day. And this is the long range TTK meta during year 2, essentially, when Cold War was already integrated. Obviously, we got the FARA, the EM2, the Cold War AK, the RAM, the Groza, the Odin, a bunch of other guns in here, and even the Milano, which is an SMG. So keep in mind that these are like long range TTKs. These are the absolute furthest you're challenging someone. And you can see that the worst in here is the AN94 at 842. And it's not really sped up by 1 headshot or 2 versus some of these completely broken. EM2 is 565 if you got 1 headshot in the mix at infinite range. So this is insane TTK. And it wasn't just the long range. If we looked at the close range meta, we had 500 millisecond TTKs, sometimes even faster. If we went with something like the ASVAL, 407, completely broken. The FFAR, 467. Even the AMAX, incredibly broken. But you can kind of see kind of how that worked. The FAL, 511. Incredibly fast TTKs. And then the bug Gallantry came up to around 450 or something like that, a little bit less than that, 425, all the way up to about 15 meters. So that's kind of how the TTKs looked back then. So we've kind of set the stage that they were way, way, way more broken, especially where I have something like this, where we're having guns in the 800 to 900 range that are currently part of our meta. We have a bunch of guns. AMAX is 949. That was because of the shot placement. And even the close range meta, if we're looking at the SOG, it comes at around 600 milliseconds, which is 100 milliseconds more, even though that's kind of where the meta sits. We have a few other ones in here on the long range meta that just don't get used. Either they have too much visual shake, too much recoil, the bullet velocity sucks, maybe you show up on the mini map, you can't run a suppressor. There's a lot of different options there. But you can see kind of where the TTKs fall, and people are hyper fixated on it being too fast of a TTK. So what is exactly happening here? I think there's a multiple different factors that are going into this, and there will probably be a little bit of how I think they could fix this. But the reason why people are thinking the TTK is so fast is because kind of been accustomed to longer TTKs, which is kind of what we had all throughout Warzone 2. A little before Warzone 2 happened, we went up to 150 HP from 100. The effective health ended up being 250 before versus now it's 300. So that extra 50 made it so that guns, you'd have to do an extra 1 or 2 shots to kill, which effectively increased the TTK pretty significantly. Then over time, they went and nerfed a lot of guns instead of buffing guns. So over time, we ended up with TTKs that were like 1200 milliseconds at range and around 625 up close, which isn't particularly good when that's your fastest TTK. So a lot of that people have gotten just kind of accustomed to how that works. On top of that, we also had worse effective TTK compared to the theoretical. The theoretical could still be 1,000, but realistically, you're going to miss more shots because the bullet velocity was much lower in these recent Call of Duty that we've had, or of Warzone. So you weren't able to have that beaminess. We know that bullet velocity is tied to the hit scan effective range, which is a little bit more of a complicated topic. But in general, the higher your bullet velocity, the better your bullets will register. But also you have a hit scan range that will make it feel like the gun is hit scan up to a certain range, because it is, so that the bullet registration will be infinitely better in those cases as well. Additional visual shake has also made it harder to see, track, and essentially stay on target, whether it's close, medium, or intermediate ranges. So even though on paper it might be 1,000 TTK, it's actually maybe ends up being 2 seconds to hit the target, which would be 2,000 TTK. Versus previously, if it was 1,000, it was probably like you maybe miss a few shots because the recoil or the bullet velocity was good, but it still allowed you to get really close to the theoretical TTK. So I think that contributes to it, but I think there's another factor is that a lot of the gunfights currently in Warzone aren't ranged gunfights. And there's a couple different contributing factors to that. We are in a ranged sniper meta. Primarily the HDR. I know some people are experimenting with some other one shot, or they have the one shot effective range, but in general, most people are using the HDR. They're combining that with the AK, which we'll talk about. But essentially what ends up happening is, since we're not getting long range gunfights, we're not having slow TTKs. We're having 0 effective TTK, because when you get headshot snipe, that's it. It's 0. Like, you don't get a chance to react. You got hit, you're dead. That end of it, you're down. So I think that contributes to it, because essentially your close range gunfights are relatively fast. Your long range gunfights are even faster with the effective 0 TTK. My thought is that if the ranged weapons could compete at range, the actual ranged weapons, so this would be a few LMGs, most of the rifles, and a few of those things, then you'd have a little bit of a balance where you feel like you could, when you make your loadout, you could choose whether or not you want to use a long range weapon or you want to use a sniper that one shots. When you offer people the choice, they're going to go with whichever one they enjoy the most if they're pretty even. Right now, though, it's not really a choice. If you're choosing to go long range, the HDR is superior for a lot of different reasons, which we'll kind of touch on. And these are the ones that I think they need to address, so that without negatively impacting the way snipers feel, you can dramatically positively impact the long range meta in terms of the rifles and LMGs, so that they can compete with those. And then when people go to build their loadout, they can choose which one they want, whether you want to choose the long range rifle that has low recoil beaminess, or you want to go ahead and do the sniper. The problem that they've done in the past, and we've seen this mistake, and hopefully they don't go down that road, is they start nerfing everything and everything feels bad. If you've been watching in Warzone 2, you know I've talked about this theme being a problem for the past 2 or 3 years, where they continued to nerf things instead of buff them, so that everything ends up feeling like trash. And you know what ends up happening? If I could choose between 2 guns that feel like trash, I'm just not going to play the game. And that's what happened previously. People stopped playing the game because sniping sucked, long range weapons sucked, and effectively, why would you play games that aren't fun to play if everything feels like trash. And I think that was a huge contributing factor. So I think they need to improve that. And they can do that through improving the visual recoil. I think they did a lot with the monolithic suppressor. And they even did like a lot of the recoil stuff 1-to-1 for the guns they brought back with the Grau, the Kilo, and the AMAX. But one thing that is completely missing, that was completely like in the hard meta for all of Warzone 1, was essentially that underbarrel for the MW 2019 weapons called the Commando foregrip. This solved a lot of the recoil stabilization, and everyone kind of gravitated towards that because it made it so your target was easier to see. You were able to be more effective at range, and you were able to hit shots. When you're able to hit shots at range, you put a little bit of fear in the sniper's head, like, ooh, they can actually beam me. I'm not actually that good of a sniper. You know what? I feel more comfortable using a rifle because with this one, if I miss, they can actually kill me, versus right now, maybe some of the higher skilled players can really be beamy at that range, but the average person is just going to go to the path of least resistance, which right now is just sniping. Obviously, they can maybe balance a little bit of the flinch with the sniping, making to do a little bit slower aim down sight speed for the HDR, and then make it so that maybe the car is, if you want to be a little bit faster, you can go with that over it. So then maybe even people have debates on which sniper they want to use. That should be the debate, not, oh, we're just going to use the HDR because it's just superior in pretty much every way. Right now, sniping, you really don't have any fear. If somebody doesn't have a glint when they're aiming at you, you're going to feel fully comfortable to just ADS, hard scope, and land your shots. And there's nothing they can do about it. Hopefully they can get in a vehicle, maybe toss some smoke, and you're still going to outline them because you have tracker or whatever the case. But realistically, if somebody's looking at you and they don't have glint, you're not intimidated by them at all in today's current meta. So they need to fix that. Like, if somebody can beam the hell out of you with the Grau, the Kilo, the AMAX, or one of the other 10 guns that I think could be improved upon in the long range meta, then you'll probably go, well, you know what? A little scary here. Let me choose my spots a little bit more effectively. And I think that's a huge part of it. Another huge contributing factor is this AK-74. Although it is nice to have a rifle up close, like we had with the FFAR, and then we also had with the XM4 and even the M4 early on in Warzone, one of the biggest problems that we've had with it is that it essentially neutralizes the close range meta. We know as of right now, you can build it out so it is effectively an SMG, and it is hands down, no question, the best sniper support in the game. And because of the way the economy works within the game, it's not really beneficial to run two rifles at the moment. Of course, you could run the AK as your close range. You could run the AMAX or the Grau or the Kilo for range. But effectively, you're going to nerf yourself because you're not going to have enough ammo. You're going to have to worry about munitions. You're going to have to make sure you're looting properly. Bandolier doesn't work in the game. It's kind of effectively been disabled for Warzone. So you're kind of screwed. You're not going to have enough ammo. So essentially what you do is you go, okay, well, I could either run an SMG with a rifle, or I could run the best possible thing up close, which is a rifle, the AK, and I'll just combine that with the most effective long range, which is the HDR. And that's kind of where we end up this situation. I think they just need to nerf its close range damage. It'll still be very viable. Maybe bump its TTK up to the 650, 700, maybe 675 range, kind of where the AMAX is sitting up close. And that's why people aren't utilizing that over the AK. Even though its TTK is competitive, but you're sacrificing something. You have this ridiculous range that goes to like 40 meters. All SMGs are essentially ineffective beyond 15 to 20 meters in terms of relevance versus an AK. When something kills at 550 and the other gun kills at 750, it's not really a fair comparison. So I think they can do that type of stuff. Although I think the general sentiment around the TTK is that it's really fast. I think that there's things that they can do to solve some of those problems, buff things, make things feel better, and then as a result, people will diversify the meta on their own. It would be great if we got the Commando foregrip in the form of an attachment. If we're not going to do that, maybe give us 6 attachments for the long range so that we can equip the monolithic suppressor for better bullet velocity, and then recoil springs for the extra recoil reduction so that at least a few more guns open in the meta. Maybe make the optics free. That's what I mentioned in a previous video, so that you would essentially have 5 attachment plus a free optic, especially since those are shared between weapon classes. So that's kind of my general thoughts. I don't think people realized it was that broken. I had a little bit of B-roll in there so you guys can see how ridiculous some of those TTKs were. Especially we had stopping power back then, which was game breaking. So we'll see how it goes. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. I had a lot of fun with it. Thank you for watching. As always, have a great day.